Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Amy Boucher Pye. Amy is a writer and speaker who is the author of the award-winning Finding Myself in Britain and also The Living Cross. She writes devotional thoughts on the globally recognized Our Daily Bread, as well as several British publications. She runs the Woman Alive book club, connecting readers with great books, and holds an MA in Christian Spirituality from Haythrop College, University of London. A sought-after retreat leader and speaker, she leads retreats, speaks to church groups, and enjoys radio interviews. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, it's wonderful for you to be with us. I appreciate you spending some time from afar. Amy lives in London, or at least in the UK. And
Yes,
so
yes.
I'd love to hear a little bit about the way the coronavirus pandemic is affecting you all there.
Sure. Well, yes, I live in North London and it's closed everything down. We're in about the seventh day or so of the UK lockdown. One of my kids got a cough. I think we're on 13 days of self-isolation now, nearly up to our 2 weeks, because one of the kids got this new persistent cough. It was just a cold, but we wanted to follow the rules. So yeah, there's a real feeling of mood swings. You know, people are hopeful and then they're down. I've been on Facebook, I've been keeping a daily diary of, the days in self-isolation and giving some resources, a few prayers here and there, and just and confessing, like on Saturday for me was really a down day. And I found that a lot of people were feeling down on Saturday. I don't know if it was because it was the first weekend that we were all on lockdown together, but I think people were just feeling the weight and the heaviness of it. And I think at this stage, and I know that this will come out a little slightly later than when we're recording it here today, but at this stage, it feels like there are people who now know people who are dying of coronavirus, or at least, they know friends of friends. And so it all feels like it's becoming more real and scarier. And hearing about Boris Johnson having the virus and Prince Charles having the virus, the virus is no respecter of class or privilege or influence. And the virus can go anywhere. And of course, God also can go anywhere, which is what we count on and lean on. So everything's shut down. We can leave the house if you're not in self-isolation once a day for exercise, and that's really had to be defined because last weekend before lockdown, it was just manic. People were in huge queues to go to the beach, to go to Snowdonia, they were not taking this seriously. So Boris Johnson did close the country down. You can leave to do like a half an hour of exercise a day, and you can leave to go to the grocery store if you need to get essentials. But otherwise, all non-essential employees need to stay home. So I've also been following a friend of mine is a radio host here in the UK, Maria Rodriguez, and she is traveling from her home in the outskirts of London into central London every day. And her Facebook posts are just quite stark because they, the trains are completely empty, and she's observing what the feeling is in this sense of eerie quiet and wondering what people are thinking and feeling, and just all of these different feelings. So how does that compare with your experience?
I mean, I think here it affects people so differently depending upon their particular stage of life or circumstances. So, for instance, many companies are still employing their workers, but they work from home.
Yes.
And so if you have little kids and you're trying to work from home and the kids are home, that is pretty stressful.
Yes.
To do that, on an unending basis. And then it gets even worse, of course, if you don't have a job that's paying at all. So a ton of people have been laid off from hospitality industry, restaurant industry, many others. And so, there's just a stimulus bill that just got passed to give some, short-term amount of money to people, but, that's not going to really hack it if this goes on for some period of time. And then you have other folks who, are at home without many or any other people and have a fair amount of time on their hands. So I've just found that the impact on this it just varies dramatically depending upon your life circumstances.
I think that's really similar to here as well. You've got the the freelancers, the self-employed, you've got the employees, you've got, yes, all the hospitality and the travel industry, the restaurants that have all been basically closed down, and the kids who are at school. Here for the schools, it's interesting that our son is in year 11, which would be the same as 10th grade. And in year 11 and in year 13, you have these massive exams, huge exams, GCSEs and A-levels they're called. And pretty much your whole schooling leads up to these exams. And after the GCSEs, which is what my son was supposed to have this year, then you move on to, you can either leave education or you can move on to a 2-year thing before you go to university. And so now these exams have been canceled. And so my son hardly has really any work to do. Whereas my daughter's in year 8 and she has been, they do everything on Google Classroom anyway. And so she has all of her assignments and has to complete them. And some schools even you have to appear at 9 o'clock and you're there until 3 o'clock working. So it's such a different time. But I resonate with you saying, because I know some people in our church, they have young children and yet they're both solicitors. And how do you get any work done in the midst of that? So it's quite a trying time.
Yes, no question. Unprecedented in our lifetimes anyway. So one of the things that's happening here quite a bit is that churches more and more are conducting worship services online. Have you found that to be the case as well?
Yes. The first week we did not because the churches were still open. So we had our church open for quiet prayer with some resources there. But yesterday we met via Zoom, and I was actually the preacher. So I preached my first sermon by Zoom, which was very interesting. But it was so good because we're a smaller church. Churches in the UK are either massive, a few of them are massive, and then most of them are a lot smaller, so 80 to 100 or even 20 people. So we had about 40 of us or so on the Zoom call, and it was just great to catch up with people, and so many people in the caring industries working for the NHS, our National Health Service, as doctors, and just to hear where they're at and to connect with them. So it was really encouraging.
So one of the things that we're trying to do as part of this series is just talk a little bit about how God has supported us during challenging times in our lives. So is there something along those lines that you would like to share with us?
Sure. Well, I know I've been watching some of your other authors, and it's been so interesting to hear how they've been talking about their books. So I thought actually that I would talk a little bit about my first book, which is Finding Myself in Britain. It is a lighthearted book in many ways. It's a through-the-year look at life in the UK from an American's point of view. So I start with harvest and Thanksgiving and go through Christmas and then end up with Wimbledon in the summer. But the themes underneath it are searching for faith, home, and true identity, because there were a lot of painful times in my early years here in the UK. I had to really find out who I was. I mean, the very first time I went to the doctor's office, which they call a doctor's surgery, the receptionist said, Mrs. Pye. And I'm like, who's Mrs. Pye? That's my mother-in-law, And I thought, oh, wait, I'm Mrs. Pye. Okay. And so then to go to the doctor and to try to learn all these new words and the ways things are done, and then to leave the doctor's office and not to have any insurance to fill out, nothing to pay. Everything is covered under the National Health Service. So all these things that I had to learn. And I found that there was a real stripping away of maybe the veneer of some of the things that I believed and some of the things that I held dear. because of this time of being away from, moving away from my family and from my friends and from good plumbing and from my work. And I had to find out, who am I in Christ, and who has God made me to be in this place. So although the book is a lighthearted look, I also talk about just finding myself in God, finding myself in Christ, and a lot of that is through prayer.
That had to have been an amazing experience, almost like a new identity.
Yeah, well, I think it was pulling I hope, all the best of who I was in the States, and then learning to be a wife and a mother, and moving from being an editor actually to a writer. That happened about 15 years ago. I was an editor with HarperCollins, and then I was an acquisitions editor with Zondervan, and I was working with all these amazing UK British writers, Adrian Plass and Rob Lacey and Michelle Guinness, and so just some fantastic authors, really the creme de la creme in my view. And then Zondervan got rid of my job, and I thought, oh my word, what is this, Lord? Why is this happening? And how much had I connected my job with who I was in Christ? And it was quite a bit. But through that, moving from an editor to becoming a writer and a retreat leader, um, I started to do what I always wanted to do, was to be a writer. And oh my word, to get my first book out, it took me 7 years, because I knew great writing and I could critique great writing, but I was so kind of, all wrapped up in my head that I couldn't actually write that horrible first draft, because I wouldn't allow myself to write that bad first draft, because I knew what good writing was, but that meant I didn't get anything out at all. So I had to kind of tape over the editor's mouth and throw her into the basement and lock her up and start writing. And it was actually through a NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Reading,
Sure, of course.
in November. I didn't write a novel, but I just used that time of writing 1,667 words a day just to do morning pages, just to write, just to get something out there. And it might have been complete horrible tosh, but at least I was writing. And then from that, then it took several more years to end a failed memoir that I was going to write. I had this hotshot, lovely U.S. agent, and he shopped it around to 15 different publishers, and 14 of them said no. And the one who said yes was the one that I was working for. So I felt like, oh, okay. And so I sat down I was working as an editor and a writer at that time. I sat down with the publisher and said, well, you don't want that book. What do you want? And he had been a bookseller. So he said, just tell us who you think we are as Brits, and let's do it as a through the year look. And then, then he was thinking about marketing, all these different marketing opportunities already. And it's true. This book came out in 2015, but I've been on the radio countless times talking about the 4th of July or Thanksgiving or these different events. So it's been a wonderful way of redemption. I guess that's always the theme, is when we face these really hard times, that God redeems them. He doesn't cause them, but he redeems them, and he gives us these amazing gifts. And so I'm really looking forward to how he's redeeming this time, even now with the coronavirus, and hearing these stories as they start to seep out. And we're hearing some of them already, and that's what I'm really praying into, is that he would continue to redeem it and to give us hope.
That's an amazing story, an amazing set of experiences I'm sure that you have had as, an American in the UK. So one of the things that we are also wanting to, provide people with is just some food for their reading. What suggestions do you have in terms of other books that you think might be helpful to people at this point?
Well, I just want to quickly mention my second book, because it might be helpful too. The Living Cross. It's a through the Bible look at forgiveness. And the Old Testament is so fascinating, because in the Old Testament, I found this out when I was writing it, that forgiveness was not interpersonal. So like Joseph did not forgive his brothers. He said, only God can forgive you. When the brothers came back and said, we're so sorry for what we did, for, enslaving you and throwing you into the cistern and leaving you to die. And they came back begging. And he said, I can't forgive you. That's God's place. So I learned that with forgiveness, that it's in the Old Testament, it's not people to people, it's God forgiving. But then with the New Testament, Jesus comes with the living cross. He dies on the cross, and then we're able to forgive each other. And I think at this time of coronavirus, we're all thinking big thoughts, and death seems maybe closer than it had before. And maybe we're thinking about, maybe I should get in touch with that sibling that I can't stand and we've had a war with. And I mean, sibling relationships in the Old Testament, there's so many that were just horrible, you know? So I think forgiveness is something that can absolutely give us hope in this time. And so that's why I wanted to mention that. But there were a couple other books that I'm reading too. This one is by a friend. You can get it in the States. This is Kathy Madivan. It's called Irrepressible. It's 12 Principles for a Courageous, Resilient, and Fulfilling Life. And she's also doing a series of daily videos that you can find on her Facebook page. The first one that she did really stuck with me, and it goes back to one of her principles. You know, what would you do if you were starting right now? What would you do if all you knew was life in coronavirus land? How would you do life differently? And why are you doing life as you did before? So that really made me think, why are we holding on to our own ways when maybe we need to be looking at new and different things? So I'm highlighting this book in the Woman Alive book club that I run, which there is a Facebook group for, which you can join. We also have a print magazine for those in the UK. Another one that I've just interviewed Becky Pippert for is called Stay Salt. Now, you may have heard of Becky from her book 40 years ago, Out of the Salt Shaker into the World. And now this one, the subtitle is The World Has Changed, Our Message Must Not. And she talks all about real evangelism where it's based on a relationship and it's not a formula. So she tells an amazing story of she and her husband lived in the UK for 7 years in Northern Ireland, and they ministered to Europe before they moved back to the States. And she tells a story about getting her nails done. And she had seen the same manicurist for 2 years. And this young woman was not at all interested in things of the faith. And Becky just felt like what could she do? She had no idea how she could spark Heather's interest. So she prayed. And she went into the salon, nail salon, and she went over to the magazines, and she felt like she felt a nudge to pull one out of the middle of the pack. And so she did, and as she was getting her nails done, she was flipping through it, and one of the pictures caught her attention, and she kept looking at it. And she realized, and Heather said, why do you keep staring at that picture? And Heather was really interested in fashion. And Becky said, oh, I know her. She's my dear friend. She was a Vogue cover model some years ago. And so that opened up this wonderful story about how the Vogue cover model came to Christ and has a wonderful faith. And it was a way for Becky to share with Heather, who had gained her trust over 2 years, about Christ. And Becky was flying back to the States the next day, so she left some materials and things. And when she came back to Ireland at the end of the summer, Heather had moved away. So it's just a wonderful story about how, as we pray and as we have real relationships with people, that we can share the gospel. And I think in this time of coronavirus, people are going to be hungry for, why do you have peace? Why do you have joy? Why do you have hope when death is all around us? Well, for Christians, death is not the final answer. I mean, it sucks. Oh, my word. Does it ever not suck? It does. And I pray so much that somebody close to me doesn't die through this, but yet it's not the final answer. So those are a couple of books I've been reading.
Those are excellent. Thank you for sharing those. They sound really wonderful. So, Amy, one of the things I'm kind of curious about is, and as an American living in the UK, have you found yourself adapting a British accent at all? Because to me, you don't sound like it at all. You sound like an American. But What do you think?
Well, no, I don't think I have. I mean, some of my family and friends think that I sound a little bit different. I definitely don't have the very nasal Minnesotan accent that I had growing up, but I moved to Washington, D.C. when I was 20, and I think I consciously tried to lose the nasal accent then and got a bit more East Coast then. I think some people, it's really interesting because I think some people who are more oral, who learn by hearing, they just change their accent all the time and they mimic others. And my daughter is a lot like that. She learns by hearing things. She loves audiobooks. And so if we spend 2 weeks in the States in Minnesota in the summer, she comes back sounding super American.
Oh, that's
Whereas,
funny.
yeah, whereas my son, he has such a London accent, and they drop their consonants and it just drives me bonkers. And it's so I'm always correcting him of, pronounce the end of the consonant, pronounce the whole word. And it's funny because it is kind of a class thing too. And my husband has what's called the received pronunciation, which used to be known as BBC pronunciation, because my husband at 8 was sent to boarding school. And the thing that boarding schools tried to do was to take all these regional accents and to turn them into not quite the Queen's English. It's class-wise down from there, but you hear, I mean, Boris and David Cameron and so many of them are all educated at Eton, these public schools where they do stamp out the regional accents. But a couple of years ago, the BBC moved from London up to Manchester in a conscious embracing of a lot of regional accents. So you have many more regional accents, but I think because I shifted my accent in my 20s to less nasal Minnesotan, more DC, that was my shifting. And now that I've come over here, I sound pretty much the same, but I do use a lot of different words. We go on holidays, not vacations, and you definitely don't wear pants. You wear trousers. Pants are underwear. And and actually in finding myself in Britain, I have a whole chapter on accents. By your accents shall ye know them. So it's a fascinating topic.
You take the lift, not the elevator.
That's right. Yes.
Well, before I got involved in this writing, I spent a lot of time in the high-tech industry with a lot of trips to Asia. And
Okay.
so people would ask me, do you understand what they're saying? And I said, yeah, well, they all speak English, all the people that I deal with. So it's pretty easy. I said, I have a tougher time when I go to the UK, where supposedly they're speaking English, and there's a certain, percentage of the folks who I can understand completely well. But there are some people in the UK that have got a very thick accent. And
Yes.
between that and using words that I was less familiar with, I have
Yes.
to really, listen hard to understand what they're saying.
Definitely. When I first moved over here was when the movie, it's slightly out there, but The Full Monty came out.
Sure.
And that's set in Sheffield. And I remember watching that thing with some other clergy spouses. And we all went to the cinema to watch it, and watching it and going, I can understand maybe 15% of what they're saying. It's like I need the subtitles on. And it did take me a long time to distinguish the different regional accents. And what's interesting now is that now I can also distinguish a Canadian accent from an American accent, which I never was able to do before moving over here. So I think it's just so fascinating and interesting, and I really enjoy accents.
Well, if you don't mind, let me take you down another tangent too.
Sure.
Premier League soccer, English Premier League
The
soccer.
Premier League. Sorry, you have to say it Premier League.
Premier League, excuse me, say I'm an American. What can I
I
say?
know.
The English Premier League soccer, is quite available on TV here in the States. Maybe over the last 15 years or so, I think was when it's become, more readily viewable. So I personally am an Arsenal fan, and you live in North London. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, are we at odds with each other, or how do you view things on that dimension there?
Well, I'm still a big American football fan and not a football fan because over here soccer is football. But my son is a massive Chelsea fan, and Chelsea and Arsenal are arch rivals.
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, but it was interesting because when he was about 5, I think, he had 4 teams that he liked: Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United, and Coventry City. Now, Coventry City is because that's what his dad supports. And I said to him, knowing that I was shaping the rest of his life, I said, you really need to choose one. And I am not going to let you choose Manchester because you've never even been to Manchester. And, Coventry City, do you really want to choose one that's not even in the Premier League? I think they go between the Championship League and the league below because there's all these leagues. I mean, another class thing we could talk about, but and so I said, why don't you choose between Arsenal and Chelsea? And he chose, I think Chelsea won that year, won. So he chose Chelsea, and now he hates the Gunners. I'm sorry. Your team.
Well, don't tell him you were talking to an Arsenal fan. So.
No, I know. And he's quite cross that you have so much soccer available because over here you have to pay loads for it. There's BT Sport, there's Sky Sports, and very little of it is shown on the BBC. So he can hardly even watch it. You have to kind of listen to it. So he's like, if only we lived in America, I could watch NBC all the time, watch all the sport that I could.
Wow,
so
that's amazing. Well, maybe you can stream it.
With no sports available and being at home with all this time, he's just dying. He loves any kind of sport. So, yeah.
Well, we've been watching more like skiing or surfing or some of these other things that don't normally get shown are now, being shown on some of the sports channels. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a good diversion, isn't it?
Well, Amy, I really want to thank you for spending some time with us. It's really been wonderful to learn, kind of the way things are going from your perspective on the other side of the pond. And, just so appreciative of you being part of the series.
Oh, thank you. I've really been grateful to be part of it as well and to get to know you a bit too, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for putting together this content for writers. I mean, it's really a great gift, and for authors as well to be able to talk about their books. So I'm very grateful that you've asked. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Amy. It was great to spend time together.
You too.